Dean Legge Show for June 26, 2014. We'll get straight into the questions because there are quite a few of them. If you're not a subscriber of Dog Post, let me tell you how this works. Typically, these are questions that get answered on a daily basis on our message board. We don't put stuff out on Twitter because we don't get paid to. Twitter isn't paying us. So if you want to get a little bit more insight into how things work at Georgia and sort of what's happening on the inside, go to dogpost.com and click on it. What happens right now is subscribers ask me questions and I answer them. So here we go. Swanee Dog 03 says, please give an estimated breakdown by class for recruiting. He says, You've said you expect the class to be up to 31 kids before Georgia got rid of Trey Matthews. That's right. It could be up to 30, so anywhere from 29 to 31 players. Right now, Georgia has 12 kids committed to them, only 3 on offense. Now, Terry Godwin, still, including on the defensive side of the ball, although he'll probably play at least some wide receiver, if not a lot of wide receiver at Georgia. But if you look at that, and then my guess or my take is that Georgia will sign at least 4 wide receivers, if not 5. They've got 1 right now. They'll sign at least 3, if not 4 offensive linemen. They've got 1 right now. The defensive line could grow by as many as 3 or 4 more players, particularly guys who can enroll early. Linebacker, it looks like they'll take at least 2 more guys. So the thing about it is, if you say 30, let's just call it 30 minus 12, 18, that's 4, 2, that's 6. 6 plus 3 is 9, and then 2 is 11. That goes from your 18 that you're missing right there goes down to 7 pretty quick. So the question then becomes, what positions are those last 7 going to be? My guess it's going to be on offense, but it could be a little bit on defense too. I mean, we don't know. I think Jeremy Pruitt's done a very good job of recruiting, period, but mainly defensively he's done a very good job of just getting guys, I think we're going to see in the near future that they did at Georgia a pretty good job, Pruitt specifically, of identifying guys late and yanking them from programs where they probably would have played quite a bit, but they were undervalued in general by the .coms and probably by the schools, Shaq Jones, etc. So we'll see how that plays out through this 2015 class. But my guess is that, if I were betting or if I were buying a stock, I would buy the stock that sells, that has offensive line, on the offensive side of the ball because they've only got 3 kids committed. Now, the question is Bobo going to grab a quarterback or not? I would take a quarterback every single class. Georgia doesn't feel like they have to be that way, and I think their track record is pretty good on quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford, Aaron Murray, David Green, DJ Shockley, etc. So I don't think they really are super concerned about quarterbacks, but I would grab one every time. I don't think they will. Do you get a running back? Do you get a fullback? I don't know if you get a fullback because a lot of times walk-ons can play that role. But if you got a Quavon Hicks out there, you go grab them. So that's how they get to 29 or 30. Big thing too is if you're at 30, that means you're 5 over the 25, which means 5 goes backwards to last year, which they can easily fit under the 2014 class. So that's the thing is that you got to remember how you can backload these kids. So Georgia will easily, I think they'll easily get to 29 or 30, no problem. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I don't think so. And I think you're seeing them take guys right now that they wouldn't always take because they're early enrollee guys. So that's, J.J. Green, Ryan Rankin were those type of guys, and that was when Georgia signed 34 kids. So with the departures, etc., Shaq, Trey, Josh Harvey Clemens, etc., I don't think I need to go through the list. DeAndre Johnson. The spots are going to be there. Okay, I believe, this is the second question from Swanee, I believe most of us expect the defense to be vastly improved in 2014, even with all the secondary departures. Do you anticipate Pruitt's effect on practice to improve the offensive side of the ball as well? No, I don't think Jeremy Pruitt's not coaching the offense. So I get what you're trying to say and sort of threading that needle there. Mike has done a very good job for a long time at Georgia with the offensive side of the ball. They score a ton of points, and improving that is going to be quite a struggle for Hudson Mason. I think if they can just get sort of near where they've been when they've had all their guys, it's going to be tough to stop Georgia if that's the case. As it relates to Pruitt, just what he's done and what you can expect from the defense, I think you've got multiple things going on. First of all, they're not playing senior quarterbacks the way they did last year. You started the season with some pretty big games against senior quarterbacks in the first 6 games. I think you had 4 very good senior quarterbacks: Taj Boyd, Connor Shaw, Zach Mettenberger, James Franklin at Missouri. So that was a tough time for the Georgia defense. Those teams put up points. So I know Clemson, Missouri, and LSU did, and South Carolina was nobody's ugly child as it relates to scoring points. They scored points too. They just didn't score in the way those other teams did. So I think that's what we're going to see. The biggest thing is that they're not playing the type of offenses they did last year. That's number one. Number two, guys like Sterling Bailey, Ray Drew, Corey Moore, Leonard Floyd, Rameek Wilson even. This isn't their first rodeo anymore. These, I think if you'd have seen Shaq and Trey and Josh Harvey Clemens come back, I think just naturally they'd be better. Because, why? They're older. They've played. That didn't happen in 2013. Those guys had all been playing either high school or junior college, or were, virtually not playing at all at Georgia. So this is an older, more experienced group. The front 7 for Georgia should be, very good. The linebackers are arguably the best in the country, and those 4 guys are very good. Jordan Jenkins is forgotten about, which is crazy. So that front 4, that front 7 is going to be very good for Georgia. I think they match up well with everybody, and I think that South Carolina, is right this second. South Carolina is the only game where they're not favored to win. We'll see how that goes as the season goes on. UGA Dog Forever 08 asks, what are you hearing about Malcolm Mitchell's recovery? Poked around a little bit about this one earlier. Obviously, those workouts are off. They're not available to media or coaches, actually. Someone said that Malcolm Mitchell was, killing it, and I said, is that really the right description for it? And the response back was, we're talking about Malcolm Mitchell. So it sounds like, Malcolm is doing pretty well. I expect Malcolm to play. I expect Justin Scott Wesley to play. I expect Keith Marshall to play. So there's a lot of guys Georgia was missing last year. That's why you had J.J. Green and Brendan Douglas, particularly J.J. Green, starting at running back. It just shouldn't happen. So I expect all those guys to be back. As far as Malcolm's concerned, I'm expecting big things from Malcolm. And, him and Justin Scott Wesley coming back gives Hudson Mason something he just did not have at the times he played at the end of last year, which is a true down-the-field threat, an experienced true down-the-field threat. A person just wasn't there in the form of Justin, really, more than anybody, but I think you want all those guys back if you can. Will I ever get used to the new site and all the changes made to Dog Post? Of course you will. Nobody likes change, okay? And I think you just have to keep in mind that we're going to be changing things a lot more often on the website, and frankly, I think it looks good. I'm not just saying that. I would say if I didn't, but we can't live in 2004 or 2002 on Scout. We're a modern company, and I think that everybody will get used to it. It's much better on the phone. So we're figuring some things out. Toll School Dog asks, of course, several questions. He says, or he or she says, I saw Mason throwing to receivers at the Woodruff practice fields the other day. What are your expectations for him? My expectations for Hudson are he's not as good as Aaron Murray, but he might not have to be. He's got a lot of power and skill with that offense. The one question mark to me, is tight end and Hudson. Those are the two things. One of those is more important than the other. But I think if Hudson just does what he can do and that's it, then Georgia's going to score a lot of points. Todd Gurley is very helpful. Keith Marshall will be very helpful. Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel will be very helpful in this endeavor, getting back Justin, getting back Malcolm, etc. Chris Conley's not a bad receiver by any stretch. Michael Bennett is proven to be a playmaker. So the pieces are there. Hudson's just got to get the ball to those pieces. And I think we're probably all freaking out a little bit too much about Hudson because of the way that he performed in the Gator Bowl. But I think that I think he wants to go fast. And if he wants to go fast, then that means Todd's going to have to be in condition. Next question is also about Hudson. Do you feel that he can win a big game on the road? Well, I'll just finish all these questions. Do you feel like he can win a big game on the road? I know he talks confidence, but is he really a gamer? I'd throw a quarterback. I know he quarterbacked the comeback versus Tech, but his mechanics, not stepping the throws from the little I've seen, concern me. Is he just going to dink and dunk, or is he going to hit the back shoulder fade as well, hit guys on out routes consistently? That's not going to be his throw. Will he be able to stand upright most of the season? Is the offensive line adequate? What's the chatter with Rumpf? Well, we've got all sorts of things in this. It's basically questioning about Hudson Mason, and I think there's reason to we don't know Hudson Mason. We have a small piece of the puzzle on Hudson. I know this. I know that there was always a fair amount of confidence with Hudson as far as practice was concerned. I think that after the Georgia Tech game, everybody was like, well, we'll see, he can do it. But look, it's not that simple. He was not working with a full deck at the end of the season at all. And I think that if you're Hudson, it's such a cliche, but it is really true. He just needs to be himself. He doesn't need to be Aaron or Matthew or whoever. He just needs to go out there and distribute the ball where it needs to go. I do think it will be a fair amount of dinking and dunking, but that's okay. I think that will also lead to the ability to strike the ball down the field. As far as him stepping into throws and stuff, I'm not a quarterback expert. I'm not sure I can even remember what you're talking about. I do know one thing. It seemed like he was gunning the ball in there the second half against Georgia Tech, and he looked awful to me in the Nebraska game. It just didn't seem comfortable at all. And I don't think anybody was comfortable during that Nebraska game. I think that it was raining. It was a boring game. It was a half-filled stadium. It was the same exact opponent you played the year before. It's just nobody wanted the game. Nebraska, nobody. The Gator Bowl. So it wasn't good. But, I think for Hudson, if I were Hudson, I'd be leaving nothing on the table. I'd be ready to ball out every second because it's the only shot you got. And you're inheriting a team that should win the East for my money. I'm saying this right now in the middle of the summer, but I just, unless everything falls apart in terms of injuries the way that it did, and unless like Arkansas and Tennessee or Florida are vastly better than they were last year, all of them, then I think they're the best team in the East. Period. UGA 53 Maine asks, do I think that Trey Matthews was a cancer to the team? And then what's the biggest difference we can expect from Grantham to Pruitt? I'll start with that one. I think Pruitt is going to be more multiple, not so set in 3-4 principles. I think you're going to see a lot more 4-down linemen with the with the outside backer creeping up, making it a 5-2 or whatever. Well, you didn't see that a lot with Grantham. But listen, the scheme is a scheme. Either you can get the players to do it or you can't. I'm not a big, you got to get the kids ready to go and make sure they know what they're doing. And I think there were times when that happened well with Todd, and there were times when it just didn't. So, and usually it had to do with how old was the player and how long had they been around. In 2012 and previous, Georgia played pretty well on defense. In 2013, they did not. Now, a lot of that had to do, for me, with the youth. And that, frankly, was just too complicated. I think it's going to be simplified for Pruitt, and I think that they're going to be very black and white, very vanilla. And I think that's probably smart for Georgia because, for the most part, you're going to be the better team every time you take the field. Might not be by a much, but you're probably the better team. So I think if you're just playing straight up, and when we play college basketball, is kind of going off a rant here. We just played straight man because we thought we were better than the other guys, and for the most part, we were. So we didn't try to confuse people. And I think that sometimes you can get too cute by half. So I think that's what we're going to see. As it relates to Trey Matthews, listen, my mother had cancer twice, so I don't think it's a really great analogy for the cancer to the team thing. I think he had to go. I think he was nothing but trouble after a while. I think that it was too much too fast, and I think that, where else would he land but Auburn? He probably should have gone there to begin with because he just wasn't mature enough. I mean this in the most respectful way. He just wasn't mature enough to play at Georgia. And, and Nick wasn't either, Nick Marshall. It happens. He'll be at Auburn and he'll play in 2015 if nothing happens bad at Auburn. D. Hewitt asks, how is Davin Bellamy coming along? I remember him being a Florida State target during recruiting, so Pruitt must think highly of him. I'm trying to think if Pruitt was there at the time. I think you've got David Bellamy, but you mean Davin Bellamy. I think he could be a pretty good player, but we just don't know enough about him yet. He hasn't done anything. There's been no reason to really keep up with Davin so far. So tough to know when guys redshirt. You hear things about quarterbacks and so forth, but defensive linemen, harder to hear. Any word on Keith Marshall, how Keith Marshall's coming along? I think Keith Marshall will be ready to play. Mike Bobo said that it was possible he could redshirt him. That was in December. So, I think Mike was just saying that. He's just like, hey, it's possible he could redshirt him, but, which means, we're not going to redshirt him. So, anyhow, any vibe coming from the team this summer? Who are the leaders? I think the leaders. It's the typical group. It's Andrews, Herrera, Mason, etc. So, I think the one thing about this is a little bit older team than last year. Todd is older. Keith is older. Hudson Mason, obviously the same age as Aaron. But the offensive line even has got some guys that, John Theus, it's do or die time for him. He could turn pro after this season. Don't you think he wants to have a good year? So I think the big thing is to get in condition, which, is not easy to do sometimes, particularly if you want to go fast, the way that it seems like Hudson Mason's going to want to do. And then just being normal dudes. Ramik, Corey, Swan, Amaro, Ray Drew, Sterling Bailey. These are all, I'm naming a lot of guys from that dream team. Those guys have been around each other for a long time. And I think this is an older team on defense. Now the secondary, I think Swan and Corey are both going to start. And I know Corey Moore's not perfect, but I'll be damned. I take him, he would run through a brick wall, and I'm not joking. But he'd need a helmet, but he'd do it. So, this is an older bunch on defense. They've gotten, the younger guys are. I think it's too bad with Josh Harvey Clemson. I think he's just, he had to go too. But I don't think Josh is a bad kid. And so I think if you'd had him around, you could really be this defense could be very dependable. There are still questions, obviously, with the secondary. Straight into another thing about the kids. If Ty Grantham stays, do the kids in the secondary stay? Josh Harvey Clemens definitely would not stay. Trey Matthews definitely would not stay. Now, Shaq Wiggins is a good question. The only thing with Shaq, who I think is a playmaker, the only thing with Shaq was, hey, listen, did you get good advice saying you wanted to transfer? Because, as gregarious and outgoing and all this stuff as Shaq is, he just wasn't very mature. And I think that there's a lot lumped on these guys when they're playing at 18 years old as starters. I'll tell you who has not had to go through this. Bryce Ramsey, Aaron Murray didn't have to do this. Those guys all got a year to breathe. That didn't happen with some of these guys. And, with Shaq and Trey, I think it was, maturity. With Josh, I think he legitimately had a problem with, substance. Will Georgia split the Clemson and South Carolina games or win both? Well, you don't have that they're going to lose, do you? I think the worst case scenario is a loss at South Carolina. I think they're just too good for Clemson this year. But if I had to guess, I think I think the Clemson game, they're probably 85% winners. I think the South Carolina game, they're probably 60%. I like their chances in Columbia. I'm not being naive. I just think they're better. Here's another question from Danger Ranger 6969. Is Georgia raising ticket prices or donation fees for the ticket holders? Yes, they will be. I don't know when that's. I think that's for next year. And this is typically a football forum, but is this a make or break year for Mark Fox? Yes. I think a lot of these years are going to be make or break years for Mark Fox. That's just like a whole nother segment. But, you can see where Georgia could be in basketball. You can kind of like see the path where they could get to the NCAAs this year. You can also see where they haven't had a really good win in a while. I say it off the top of my head, and I'm trying to remember. Missouri turned out to be pretty bad. Every team from the conference that went to the tournament, they didn't even play them within 10 points. My view, my take, it's too long. If Mark Fox doesn't get to the NCAAs this year, I think it probably is going to be too much because that's a long time. That would have been the longest tenure between NCAA appearances, in Georgia, since they went in. They would have gone in 2003, but they didn't get to go. So you're talking about 4, 5, 6, and 7 they didn't go. So that's 4 years. They went 11, so they didn't go 12, 13, 14, and 15. So that's 4. And Dennis was fired after 4. So I don't know. I think the standards has got to be raised as far as fans are concerned. I think that Georgia fans deserve much more than they're getting from their basketball program. That's not uniquely a Mark Fox problem, but Mark Fox is the head coach. So I think that, and I think he understands the situation, but, it's time to win. It's time to win. There's no reason a state as blessed in basketball talent, or just an institution as good as Georgia, whether they're in Wyoming or not, there's no reason they shouldn't win more in basketball. Kelly 1980 asks, what's the truth in the number 2 quarterback situation? A lot of talk about Balta being ahead of Ramsey on the depth chart. I don't know what the depth chart says, but I can tell you right now, if there's nobody I talk to in that program at Georgia that thinks that Bryce Ramsey wouldn't be the first person coming off the bench. So, and now, will Balta get into games? I hope he does because I think he works. Bryce Ramsey could learn a thing or 6 from, Balta's, work ethic and getting into it. But, I saw Ramsey and Rankin going into the Butts-Mehre not that long ago. They were about 30 minutes before everybody. So, look, Bryce Ramsey is special, but there's no real, you don't have to be any pressure on the guy. This is Hudson Mason's team. Hudson Mason's going to start every game. As far as Balta and Ramsey, I got Ramsey by far, but I don't think there's anything wrong with Ramsey being pressured or the notion of him being pressured. I thought Balta balled out as well as he could have in that G-Day game. I thought Ramsey played as poorly as he could have. And the fact that Ramsey wasn't, that Balta wasn't the clear number 2 coming out of spring tells you all you need to know. When do we get to see how good Jeb Blazevich is? I heard good things about Jeb Blazevich, actually. I couldn't get more into detail about that, other than, just someone mentioning, hey, he's good. So I don't know what that means, but we won't get to know that until, you got a pretty crowded tight end situation with J. Rome. Is Quavon Hicks really a tight end? And then you got Jordan Davis. So I think Blazevich will play, is my guess. But how much is a good question because, younger guys, do you redshirt a guy or do you just throw him out there in special teams? Good question. What is Georgia's chances with Roquan Smith? I think no worse than 50-50. I would have said earlier that, it'd be tough to beat Georgia out. I think that's probably still true, but I don't think it's a slam dunk right now. Who's my breakout freshman this year? Well, I got 3, I guess, or 4. Let me just hedge the whole thing. I got 4 guys that people won't shut up about. Shaq Jones. I think he's supposed to be very good, or he can't lift weights at all, but he can, perform. So it sounds a lot like Shaq Wiggins, except maybe he's more mature. Malcolm Pierce, I think, is going to play or start as a corner, as a nickel, as the nickel back. He's a good player. Now he's short, but he is rocked up big time. And there's no fat on him. And then, I think Nick Chubb is completely ready to go in the SEC. Guy is tough mentally. But Sony Michel, too. One of those 2 guys, if not both. I think in the conference anymore, if you've got 4 running backs, you're tough to deal with because Todd's going to be the number 1. I think Keith will be the 2. And the question is, do you save Sony and Nick because of Brendan Douglas? Or do you redshirt? You can redshirt Brendan Douglas, or, there's any number of things to do. And then you also have A.J. Turman as well. So there's a lot of competition at running back. There sure wasn't last year. I think you could tell after a while, too. Does Lamont Gaillard see the field this year? No, I don't see how he does, but that's me. J.M. Tolldog asks, how do you see the SEC East shaping up right now? And I'll just read the rest of his questions. Do you think Florida is underrated? Do you think South Carolina is overrated? How far are the Vols from returning to relevance? Good questions. Relevant questions. I see Georgia winning the East, and I see either Florida or South Carolina as the number 2. I think South Carolina does not beat Florida in Gainesville. I think Muschamp figures it out and gets to like 8 wins, one of those being South Carolina. It could be Georgia, too. They better watch it. I think Florida is underrated, but I do think that their schedule is absolutely brutal. Georgia, Florida, this is all on top of my head. Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Florida State, Bama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU. It's going to be too much. The Gators can't win the East this year. But I think they're going to get somebody. They don't play. I don't think they can beat Alabama. I don't think they can beat Florida State. So they'll take those losses. They can beat South Carolina, but they'll have to play well. That game's in the swamp. I'd watch that. Carolina's a 7-point favorite. I would take that right now. Is South Carolina overrated? I think they are overrated. I do think they're one of the best 3 in the East. I think Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. That's how I'll vote it. Probably Georgia, Carolina, then Florida is probably how I'll get it. But I could see a path for them getting to Atlanta, but the problem for them is they got to go to Florida. They've got Auburn on the road. Of course, they host Georgia, but they host Texas A&M as well. So, they should beat Texas A&M for me, South Carolina. But I do think, like a top 10 team, they've lost a lot. Mike Davis is very good, but they've lost a lot. He's basically what they are returning. They feel like they have one of the best offensive lines they've ever had. That'll help a ton, but that defense is going to get scored on. So I think South Carolina is overrated. But again, now let me just say this about South Carolina. I think it depends on which outlet you're talking about. Athlon has them pretty high. Lindy's has them. USA Today's got them like 23. So I think, and ESPN doesn't have them as high as, some of the magazine publishers. So South Carolina's a curious case. We'll know more. We'll know a fair amount about Georgia and South Carolina after those first weeks. But this time Georgia gets a bye going to that Carolina game. Georgia seems to get their stuff together before bye games here lately. And how far is Tennessee from returning to relevance? We're going to need a quarterback. I don't think they have that right now, at least not what they want, not the traditional Tennessee, guy that can get them to Atlanta. And the other thing is, boy, they're bad on the lines. So I think they're 2 or 3. I think it's 2 years still. They have a brutal schedule this year. They've got the problem for them is they've always got 4 teams that they should probably lose to each year as it stands right now: Bama, Georgia, Florida, and Carolina. Now, they're not beating Alabama anytime soon, I don't think. Georgia, they can beat Georgia. They beat South Carolina last year, and they had Florida on the ropes before they crap themselves. So it's, for me right now, it's about mental toughness with Tennessee. Year 1 was fine with Butch Jones, but they're going to need to get a big win. And the South Carolina game helped, but then you got to back it up. I mean, you got to back it up right after that. Beggar asks about walk-ons. I would say the only one that I would get super quasi-excited about is Aaron Davis, the corner, because he's a big enough kid to have played in the SEC, and I think that he just slipped through the cracks, which should not happen in a state like Georgia, but he had the ACL injury, et cetera, et cetera. I thought he looked good at G-Day. I mean, there's a reason he was starting with the starters. So, listen. Here's your Payne Hall asks about tell us everything of interest that you know and none of that the rest of us know. I'll give you a path to, if you're an optimist, I'll start with if you're a pessimist, you lose at South Carolina, you lose to Auburn, and somebody else beats you, and you're sitting at 9-3. I just can't see them below 9 wins, because that means that they were lost to maybe Missouri on the road and Tennessee, or Missouri on the road and Georgia Tech. I mean, it's hard to string together the losses here. If you're an optimist, let's just say if you're a pessimist again, you could lose to South Carolina, you could lose to Clemson, South Carolina, Florida, Auburn, Missouri. So that would be 7-5. I don't think they're going to lose to Florida. I don't think they lose to Clemson. I don't think they lose to Missouri, but Missouri, South Carolina, and Auburn, those are tough games. But Missouri's lost a lot too. Now, if you're an optimist, you can sit there and look at it and say they could maybe win every single game they play this year, because this schedule is not that tough. Auburn and Tech are at home. Obviously, Auburn is the tougher game. The toughest road game is South Carolina, and they're a 3-point dog. They're favored against Auburn only because they're at home. So, is Auburn going to play the way they did last year? No shot. Okay, they got drilled by LSU. They barely hung on to beat Mississippi State, Bama, and Georgia. They lost to Florida State, obviously. So I don't think Auburn plays the same way. I think they're still good, but I don't think they win the West. I don't know who wins the West. Could be Auburn. I don't think it'll be as magical as it was last year. Clemson and Georgia should win that game. South Carolina, that is legitimately a toss-up. They play Troy, who's not good. They should beat Tennessee. They should beat Vanderbilt. Then it's tricky. See, you go out to the Ozarks. You play Arkansas and Missouri. If you don't get sidetracked out there, you got a shot to be undefeated going into the game with Florida. I think Florida's going to be better than people think, but I think there's a reason Georgia's a 10-point favorite over them. I take the dogs in that one. Then they play at Kentucky. Come on, they should win that game. And then they play Auburn. Now that's the game they could lose for sure. Auburn's pretty good. Doesn't matter if it's Auburn's physically, they have the ability to do things a lot of teams in the country don't. It's like Georgia playing their brother. I get it. I mean, literally, some guys that used to play for Georgia are now literally playing for Auburn. So that's a game they could lose. But that doesn't matter. Now if you have just one loss and you get the championship game, you're fine. I don't know who the Charleston Southern, etc. They win that game. I mean, Tech, I don't see it for Tech. Then the question is, can you get past either LSU, Auburn, Alabama, or, mystery team? Well, Ole Miss, anybody buying that? So one of those 4. I just don't think the SEC is very good this year, frankly. I think it's down. I think that the conference has been very good. It's still the best conference. But there's definitely a path there to get to the playoff. I'll believe it when I see it. But I do think they get to Atlanta and get into a one-game scenario. And, you get into enough one-game scenarios, eventually you win the championship. So, anyhow, long-winded, but 35 minutes worth of goodness. Come check out dawgpost.com, DAWGPOST.com. Dean Legge, signing off.